and YouTube blog covering the German startup scene with news, interviews, and live events.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Joe from Startuprad.io, your startup podcast and YouTube blog from Germany, bringing you again another interview, this time not with an entrepreneur from Germany, Austria or Switzerland, but we will talk about Germany, Austria and Switzerland. I first would like to welcome Daniel, who actually resides right now in the Netherlands. Hey, how are you doing?
Hey Joe, thank you for having me. Doing very well. Fairly close by to Germany, so that should be okay.
Yeah, and I do believe if you speak Dutch, you can understand a lot of German and the other way around.
Yeah. However, I'm originally from Italy, so my Dutch is enough to order a coffee, and my German probably even worse.
And we discussed it before, but the very important question here, you're living in Rotterdam. Is there good Italian food around?
No, it's getting better. It's getting better over the past, I've been here almost 10 years now. But I mean, it's impossible. It's impossible.
Okay, glad we got that out of the way. You are here because you are the founder of Equidam, a company which helps entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs, to give a fair valuation to their startup idea very early on, especially. But before we do that, of course, as always, down here in the show notes, you will be linked. Your LinkedIn profile, and I went through it, and I've seen you did quite a lot of international studies, like Padua. How is it really called? Università
degli Studi di Padova. Yeah.
Oh, Italian is such a beautiful language. Sorry for butchering that. No. You've been also in Glasgow, and I assume you ended up in Rotterdam because you have been there at Erasmus University, right?
Yeah. So I come from a small village close to the border with Austria, actually. Even though that's also an Italian-speaking village, so no German-speaking then. And then, I studied economics and management in Padua, and then did an exchange semester in Glasgow, the University of Glasgow, which is actually a very nice university with some very big names as professors, which was pretty awesome. And then, I came to Rotterdam for my master in finance and investments in 2013. So quite a bit of moons ago, but studied a bit all over the place, always finance and kind of trying to bring it. Rotterdam, when I came here, was the fourth best university in Europe for finance. So that's kind of what brought me to the flatlands. Yeah.
Flatlands. Very nice. Can you give us like a 10-30 second pitch why people should go to Padua? Because I've been researching it a little bit on the internet. I've never been there, honestly, but it looks very, very nice.
Yeah, Padua is a nice little city. It's about 250,000 people with 60,000 students or so. So it's very university centered, let's say, but very historical. I think, a few monuments to see. Definitely a very nice little Italian city to see.
And when I see this right here, it's not too far away from Venice. And if you travel from Milan to Bologna, like I did, logical stop would be Padua and then Venice. So guys, here is your next travel idea. Exactly. After taking again a detour, sorry guys, I'm the king of detours, I know here. We already know how you ended up in Rotterdam, but I see you've been doing a few stops before you started Equidam. You set it up originally in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, right?
Yeah. Directly out of university, really. Before that, I had an internship with a small company interesting. It was the Italian importer of ATVs and scooters for certain brands. So completely unrelated, but definitely an interesting, fun experience. And then, yeah, Equidam through the studies here in Rotterdam. Yeah.
Okay, and now the interesting question: how did you end up evaluating startups? Because my understanding is you had some background from finance. Of course, it's also an interesting topic. I've once seen a book called "The Dark Side of Valuation," pre-revenue startups and stuff like that. I do believe it's interesting. I do believe it's a great idea, but I'm not sure what attracted you there enough to say, oh, let's say here in the flatlands and set up a company. Sorry for everybody from the Netherlands. Very sorry. It was just such a funny
they know
term.
it's very flat. They know it's very flat. The yeah, right. How does somebody end up in valuation? It's one of those topics that if you tell it at parties, people like kind of go talk to somebody else, So the so like in general,
There we have the headline of the interview.
but it's true. It's true. The so when I was like 15 or so, I was really into like programming and things like that. And when I came afterwards, I did decide to go study finance and not like computer science and those things. But when I was studying here in Rotterdam, I was really thinking, okay, a lot of this process can be automated with with proper data on a website and have it as a do-it-yourself solution. So we started actually with a blog. We started with a blog that was talking about entrepreneurial finance, trying to help entrepreneurs with the topics of finance, because entrepreneurs, they know a lot about their own field. They know a lot about maybe management if they come from business, but not strictly speaking about finance. And so we really thought there was a gap to fill. And through the blog, we basically iterated the idea, and this question of valuation always came up from all sides. And obviously it's a central topic in entrepreneurial finance, is the valuation of the startup when the company raises capital and so on. And and we kind of said like, okay, with the computer background, with a lot of data, we can definitely make this into a solution and see where it leads us. um, in terms of like,
I really like what you did there. Basically, you're testing the waters. You did not do like any survey or something for your idea valuation. You just put out a blog and always leaned toward where there is the most interest, which I personally find very interesting, very novel approach as far as I can tell.
yeah, I think it was a bit of a mix, because I do believe that the calculation itself is super interesting. Like finding out the actual value, of course, is what you try to do on the stock market all the time. But on the stock market, the margins are so thin. The every stock is researched by thousands of people, and it's very difficult to innovate much to bring a lot of value. But I think on the private market, at least when we started, it's but also now, like it's a dark art, as you said, right? As you said about the book, it's a dark art that is super interesting to explore with data. Is super interesting to explore in a leveraged way, I believe. So yeah, that's that's how I got into this racket.
And how did you acquire your first clients?
Yeah, so we did like an incredibly sort of extreme application of that theory of, if you're not ashamed of your first version, you didn't launch fast enough. So our first version was up in 2 weeks. It was like what would now be a Squarespace website with a Google form, with a PayPal link, and a lot of manual process in the back. And we started testing it with a bit of advertising, a bit of AdWords campaigns. And also, we were working very closely with a crowdfunding platform here in the Netherlands. And of course, they had all these entrepreneurs that wanted to raise capital on this platform, and they didn't have the resources to do a proper valuation with a valuator. But at the same time, they all had these ideas of there was this guy with a whiteboard, and he drew a pair of glasses on the whiteboard, and he wanted a valuation of 2.5 million in 2013. So the platform really had a need to calm down this over optimism from companies, and that's where we fit in at the beginning.
And now we talking about valuation of companies. My understanding is what you also have on your website, that you helped more than 130,000 startup companies to get a valuation. My understanding is that your biggest market is Europe, your second biggest market is the US, and then there are some markets like Asia, Middle East, Africa, South America, where you also do some work, but basically it's not your main market. So I would be first, before we talk about that, I would be first curious, what did you learn so far in the last 9 years evaluating startup companies? Do the founders get crazier or the investors?
That's a good question. So, a lot of things have changed, I think, over 9 years in the startup environment, especially in Europe, but I think all over the world. They both get crazy, I think, in different directions. No, so entrepreneurs, like you always have optimism. That's what fuels entrepreneurs, right? And that's like very well and good. But when does it become, overconfidence, and when does it become even more than that? So that's always the question. And you do have sometimes, like, people that are super convinced that they are gonna be the fastest growing company in history, which is fine. Like, it could be, but statistically, it's not gonna be, right? So there's a very, very, very small chance, and so so there is all that part. Investors on the other side, like, we started with very much unsophisticated investors, I think, at the beginning. A lot of people coming from real estate, a lot of people coming from traditional investments in maybe more traditional companies, and they didn't get the startups, they didn't get the valuations, for sure. They didn't understand them, and they didn't understand scaling, hyperscaling, software margins, SaaS, SaaS risk return profiles, and so, like, a lot of people were just lowballing valuations for a very long time, not because of their fault, just they didn't know, and I think, like, that has finished pretty much now. Like, now that we're seeing, like, in my opinion, the peak of valuations is because people finally understood the model of software. But yeah, things have changed a lot. Yeah.
As we said in the beginning, we will end up in a German-speaking startup scene. You prepared a few weeks for this. Awesome. And by the way, once again, exclusive data here. And but I would first like to get a rumor out of the way, because my understanding is that a lot of people, especially here in Germany, talk about, oh yeah, there are always big evaluations in the US. Are they higher? Because I just talked on another podcast to somebody who does professionally evaluate companies, and he said, yeah, two guys, zero revenue, with a computer in a garage working on an idea. It's 1 to 2 million US dollars valuation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's definitely true. Like there is a discrepancy. The question is it an unfair discrepancy? Like, the main differences with the US and Europe are a market difference, a huge, like, the US is a huge single market, pretty much, that a software company can conquer basically from one office, pretty much, where Europe is a lot of different markets with different regulations, with different, we cannot even hire cross country without a lot of complications. And so there is much more potential, maybe, from a US standpoint, for the startup to grow much bigger. The M&A market is much more developed, much more active, much easier to sell companies at much higher valuations. And and okay, the capital is also more available, but that's, I think, less and less true. Like, it was really, really true at the beginning, 5 or 6 years ago. Now, I don't think that's a discrepancy that justifies all that difference in valuation. So, yeah, valuations are still different, but is it, if a company is based in Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, and it has the same scaling opportunity of a company based in San Francisco, would the valuation be different? Yes, but not by that much. I think the main difference is the difference in opportunity and the difficulty in achieving that large opportunity. That makes the valuations different. And the costs, of course, right? So there's also an incredible difference in costs for salaries, for a lot of things from Europe to the US, which means they do have to raise more money. They do need to have a higher valuation in order to justify also the incentives for the founders, right? When we talk about a valuation of 2 million for a pre-revenue, two people in a garage that are just getting started, that valuation is not really well, it's based on the company itself, but it's also based on, we need to give these founders enough equity to have incentives to bring this company to success in the future. And if they need 1 million and we take 85% of the company, these guys are going to be working for Google in 3 months, so we're basically wasting that million. So we give them a higher valuation, a bit because of math of this big opportunity, but also because we want them to have the right incentives at the beginning.
That sounds pretty good. Just a guesstimate. Can you make that? How much would it be here around in Germany? Two guys, a computer, two computers in a garage, and pre-revenue.
So it's super difficult to say. I think we're not that far off. Definitely in between the 2 million and the half of that. I think those are the valuations discrepancies right now. It's not as huge as it used to be. It used to be easily 10 times that. Somebody in Europe was raising at 600K for the same round. They were raising at 6 million pre-money in the US. Now is much different.
Now we get to the interesting part. Let's talk about Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and what you've learned there. Disclaimer, I don't know the data up front. I just know he prepared something for us. And of course, if you go down here in the show notes, wherever you're watching this, wherever you're listening to this, there will be a link, and there you can see all the data. Plus, if you're listening to this on our radio station, you can scan the cover code and there will be a QR code that brings you straight to our Medium blog.
Yeah, so what we're doing a little bit with our data is to try to go against the hype a little. A lot of the startup news that people see around is about the best startups, and so I think a lot of founders kind of live with the impression that they can raise 500 million after 6 months, and that's because maybe one startup or two startups have done it. They made the news a whole lot. With our data and with all the startups that go through us, maybe we have a little bit of a less biased view on these things. And so, for example, something that surprised me is if we look at rounds in Germany from 0 and €1 million, the companies are on average from 2020, so they are 2 years old, and we're looking at the past year of data gathered on Equidam. They have on average 2.25 founders and 2 employees on top of those founders, right? So there is already something there. It's not the two people in a garage, and when we look at funding rounds from 1 to 2.5 million, the companies are on average 4 years old. So between 3 and 4 years old, and they have 7.5 employees, right? And then when we look at funding rounds between 5 and 7 million, we have instead 15 employees. So this is like, I think, a little bit different compared to the WhatsApp story that they were 40 people and they sold to Facebook for, what was it, 4 billion? No, 16 billion at the time. And I think it's quite interesting to see that like the vast majority of companies is like normal companies that take normal time, let's say, to hit these milestones.
That's definitely an important point here. So you only hear about the most extremes, the like the top outliers here, and it's not too bad if you don't do it, as long as you are if you can survive. And as you said, like the biggest like the bigger money comes in like 2 years after you founded, 4 years after you founded, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So basically you have to have a long breath, and as I said, you have to be pretty enthusiastic about that.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, there were some strange statistics on these things over the years. But for example, even like there was a big study in France about communicated funding rounds, no, and they double checked all the press releases with the data that came out in the Chamber of Commerce after a couple of years. And what they found is that the press releases are overstated by on average 20%. So, and this is not even only the valuation, even the amount of capital is overstated, which I thought always, okay, this must be the only certain number in the world is how much money they actually raised in this round, right? But even that is overstated by on average 20%. And then pair to that the fact that all the people that don't have a funding round that is worthy of a PR, they probably are not going to even end up in a database, right? They're not going to end up on Crunchbase or Dealroom or whatever it is. So, when you do those averages, like you get a really biased picture. And, and I think for a lot of founders, biased in the wrong way, like, so, yeah, I think quite an interesting phenomenon that happens in this industry.
And my understanding is you have to have a few employees before you can even raise millions. And my other understanding is that that you have to have something to show, because nobody will say, "Oh yeah, you look nice. I'll give you I give you €1,000,000." That just doesn't work like
that's
that.
I mean, that's the average, right? So, and that's the strange thing about looking at averages is that, you can be that company that raises without anything because, we saw, for example, a company had a key patent in the technology of a large pharmaceutical company. And obviously they were like 4 people pre-revenue and they sold the company for, I think, 95 million euros, so obviously those things happen. But I think it's it's good to look at a bit broader data than just assume that everybody raises without. So the actual data is much more conservative, quote unquote, than the PR that you see on magazines, let's say.
Okay, what I take now out of it, if you get some press releases, the money is 20% less, the valuation is 20% lower on average, and you have to be there 2 years to raise million amounts, and you, as my personal feeling is as well, also state that you mostly the headlines are grabbed by the positive outliers. As you said, like a handful of people, 95 million pre-revenue. I don't think a lot of people would buy a pre-revenue company for any price, and then 95 million. Well, there has to be a reason behind it, but most of the time it's called a strategic price.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So definitely have something. What we always advise people to do is, taste the waters, right? Like speak with a few investors that maybe are not your top picks for your funding round, and understand what where the market is at with these type of things. Because just by looking, what a lot of people do is that they look at the press, they look maybe at some databases, maybe they look at some crowdfunding platforms because they have public valuations. But they don't realize they don't realize this bias. And investors, they get pitched 100 companies a day. They know where the market stand, and they know um, you know the specifics of a company that needs to raise at this moment in time, because it's a competitive process, right? It's not like you don't need to fit a checklist. You need to be the best in a group of companies, right? So until you ask, you pretty much are never going to know where you stand in that group of companies.
And the thing is, you usually don't learn it. There is a big information bias in favor of big asymmetric information, I do believe is the right word, in favor of the investors. And basically, that's why you are here, is my understanding.
Yeah. So we are here for the information and for the knowledge bias, because aside from not having the data, a lot of founders don't even have the knowledge on how to calculate valuation and how to do these type of things. On the other hand, we do serve like both sides. So about 10% of what we do is actually buy side, so investors and all the platforms and all those people. So we're always trying to find out what's a fair price for the company. And that's has a bunch of assumptions, like there should be multiple buyers, should be a liquid market and things like that. So it's very difficult to say what's a fair price, but that's what we strive for in what we do. Yeah.
Mhm. You've mentioned crowdfunding platforms with public valuations. What do you say are the valuations on crowdfunding platforms? Are they high? Are they on average? Or are they on the lower end of what you would expect?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So how do you answer that question, right? If the returns are more or less in line with the risk that people are taking, right? And now we're starting to have actually maybe enough data about the first years of crowdfunding, because the startups have evolved and some have managed to cash out. And like from the fact that nobody talks about it, I guess, like it's not all sunshine and rainbows there. So it's a good question. Then the other question is, are the startups overvalued, or are we just not picking the right startups in the crowdfunding platforms? But overall, it seems that like some startups have been very successful and they raise capital on crowdfunding platforms. So especially I think in the UK, a lot of them have made the news because that's also the most developed market for equity crowdfunding per se. So it could be, with the right selection, it can be profitable as a portfolio, even adjusting for the risk. So I mean, in what we do, we help a lot of crowdfunding platforms, and I don't think the valuations are much different in the ones that we help compared to the ones that we don't help. So it seems to be fairly fair. Yeah.
Okay, you talked about helping, and we're now recording for more than 25 minutes, and you did not pitch your services yet, which I greatly appreciate. But can you tell us, like, to make the 30 minutes full, tell us a little bit about what people could expect on your platform? And of course, as always, there will be a link down here in the show notes where you find the link to Equidam.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. No, but I think like what people can do. The reason to go on Equidam is that you're either planning a funding round, or you received interest, you received more or less an offer, and you wanna give a counter. And what you do is that you can come on Equidam, you fill in some simple information about the company, you fill in your financial projections, and then the platform calculates the value of the startup with 5 methods. and it prints a PDF report that you can use when negotiating the valuation with investors, or when you're making a counter for investors. So that's how about 90% of our customers use Equidam. Yeah.
Okay, and for everybody who would like to learn more or reach out to you, you can go down here in the show notes. I have one funny question because you talk such a lot about funding and stuff like this. Are you guys currently open to talk to investors if they approach you? And of course, I know you have a total proper valuation for yourself nailed down, right?
we know how to put the right numbers. No, not at the moment. Not at the moment. We're currently happy with our situation, but it might be this year, depending on a lot of changes on the market. Yeah.
And all investors who would like to reach out to you directly, down here in the show notes, there's also your LinkedIn profile. Only thing left for me. Thank you very much. Mille grazie. Hope the best for you, and maybe we'll have you back in some time and we talk about recent developments. My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's all, folks. Find more news, streams, events, and interviews at www.startuprad.io. Remember, sharing is caring.